Hey guys!
Hi!
We are here today to tell you about 5 tools in Lightroom that you wish you would have known about sooner. And these are kind of beginner level tools. Maybe you've skimmed over them or just haven't quite gotten to them yet, but we are really excited to share some tips with you.
And we're going to try to do it in the most basic terms possible. We're not super techie people. We're pretty good in Lightroom. We use it every day, but we are not going to get too technical on you. We're just going to kind of show you the end result and then how to get that result using these tools.
Yeah, so we're going to jump right in and we hope you find it helpful. Okay, so for this tool, we are going to talk about white balance and this white balance dropper. Essentially, this is trying to help you just read the whites in the photo and take them as close to true white as possible. Depending on the editing style, that might vary a little bit if you tend to have more warm images or cool images, but this will kind of help you get to a good starting point.
Also, screens vary. So like depending on what screen you're on right now, you may be seeing the image warmer or cooler than we do. So just bear with us if you're like, hey, why are you fixing that? That already looks warm. It might be because your screen is varied from ours. We have calibrated screens. So they're calibrated to like the professional printers and things like that. So if your screen isn't calibrated or if it's calibrated differently, you might see it a little differently than we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so this is just a raw file with my preset applied and my exposure adjusted to where I want it. And so the very next step that I would do would be the white balance. So I'm just going to grab this little dropper tool. And typically I try to pick any kind of neutral tone within an image. So this one luckily has a lot of white in it, but I'll just kind of put it over where it's a little bit grayer and it will adjust it for me. So this is what it's reading as a true white. That's pretty close to how I would like it, but they look just a little bit on the grayish blue side to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to manually adjust the temperature and tint a tiny bit, but that gets me a little bit closer. So when I click on temperature, if you use the plus and minus, it'll allow you to just adjust it in small increments. So I really only went up a tiny bit there, and I'm going to go up a tiny bit in the pink so that they look nice and healthy.
Yeah, and you'll notice in that tool that if you grab the dropper and you come over and you tried to pick something that was black, or you tried to pick an area that was like a little bit overexposed, it won't work. It needs like a kind of a neutral white or gray area so that it can, it can kind of go crazy. So so that's what we said. You want to choose like a neutral area, like not an overexposed white area, not a, a blue jean, because obviously then it overcompensates and it's like, oh, that's really blue. We need to make this photo super warm. It's kind of like an auto white balance.
Yep. And so, for example, we've got another photo here. This is the same thing, just the raw file with the preset applied. It looks cool, like, and it was cool, like it was raining on this day, and so everything tends to be a little bit bluer in your images naturally. And so that blue sky is kind of reflecting on her dress and his suit, and so this is going to be an example where if I pull from her dress, it's probably going to make this image pretty warm, warmer than I probably want it to be, but it'll get their skin a little bit closer and I can adjust from there. Out of curiosity, if I pull from this chair over here, yeah, it still keeps it pretty warm. So this is an example where it is not always spot on. And so I would just take my plus and minus, just kind of drag it down. Like, she looks nice and warm and healthy there, but a little on the green side. So then I'm going to adjust my tint and I back up and make her look nice and pink.
Yeah, it doesn't work every time, that's for sure. So like she said, on an image that's just overall pretty cool with bluer tones, the computer just is like, oh, we really have to warm that up. And so you usually have to bring it back down. I find that it warms things up too much most often, but it gives you a better starting point than sometimes your out of camera photo.
Yeah, and so this is saying like this is back to the original here, if I pull from the gray, may not make it quite as drastic. Yeah, that's a lot closer than pulling from the white hair.
Because her dress, like she said, is reflecting so much blue just because it's white. So the gray is usually a better option.
but their skins look pretty good and pretty close to where I'd want them. And then her dress doesn't look too blue, a little purple in there, but you can adjust that with the next tool that we're gonna share.
So the next tool we're going to look at is the HSL slider, and I would classify that as like singling out one color in the image and being able to adjust just that color. So for example, on this image, we have a lot of brick all around them. So of course that's going to cast red and orange up onto their skin and onto her dress. So I knew I was going to need to probably pull down the reds and the oranges, and I don't want to affect the whole image. So instead of like pulling saturation on the whole image and the sky getting less blue, this allows you to just kind of single in on a color. So,
and HSL stands for what it says right there: hue, saturation, luminance. Sometimes you can think about luminance as like how light or dark the color it is, so like lighting. And the saturation would be like how vivid the color is, how much pigment is in the color, and hue would be like if you go from an orange red to a burgundy red.
Right.
Adjust
and
it.
you see, like as you toggle between the different areas, it gives you new options. So we'll start in saturation actually, because that'll kind of be the biggest one that we're going to be changing. Or then you can look at all of them if you want to, if you double click it. So I'm just going to kind of show you in reference to where this is. So you start up here at your basic, and then it's just a few areas down the HSL color slider. So these little tools here are really handy because you can kind of turn on that section and turn it on and off. So you'll see if I turn it off, it gets rid of all the changes that I had made just within this slider. And you see how red, this is kind of what I was talking about. See how it's really casting colors onto like the bottom of her elbow, and even like on his shoe, that's obviously way too red. And even just in general over here, I wouldn't want my bricks to look that red. So you can turn it back on, and it applies all the settings that I've made. And I'm just going to kind of show you, I usually start in the saturation area because that seems to make the biggest difference. And I can just grab the reds, and let's go ahead and we can put them at 0, which would be what they were to start with. So if you double click on that area, it goes to 0. And then you can see just like his ear is super red, the brick is a little red. And so I just grab that and drag it down to where I feel is a little more true to color.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a great way to like adjust your style. Like a lot of people who have very specific color styles, that's mainly done within here. But for Sierra and I, like trying to have our editing like as close to real life as possible. Like this is a way, like the brick doesn't look as vivid in person, but the tones of the camera pick it up a lot stronger. And when you add contrast to an image, it makes it stronger than it looks to your eye in person. So this is kind of bringing it back down a little bit.
Yeah, that's usually what we're kind of doing with the HSL slider, is just bringing it back down to true color. And then, like she said, so right now there's a big trend in editing to like desaturate your greens. Well, this is where they do that. There's not a lot of green in this image, unfortunately, but you can kind of see in her flowers, if I were to grab the green here and pull it down, it just makes it a lot less of like a lime green. So this is where a lot of the stylistic stuff happens for your editing style. So for the purposes of just beginning, like you don't want to probably go too drastic with these, because you can start to affect things in a negative way and it can start to look weird. So like say I pulled my reds way down, then they look dead, like they don't have any skin color or anything like that. So you don't want to be too crazy, but it allows you to make corrections to skin tone. And then same thing with like the luminance slider. We can go in just on the reds and we can brighten or darken them. So let's say I wanted them to be a little darker in the skin tone areas. Now keep in mind, like anything else that's red is also going to be affected. So all of the brick and everything like that, you'll see minor changes. And unless I, really drag it over, it's kind of hard to see, but you can kind of see where it's affecting now if I go drastically over.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm going to bring it back to probably around like -20. And then I actually think I took the saturation down a little too much because they don't look, they look a little, for lack of a better term, I always just say they look dead, because they have no color in their skin. And then hue is an area that I don't like adjust quite as much, but it is still helpful. It basically takes your red tones, and you can kind of, if you look closely here, you can see at this end of the spectrum it's red, and then at this end of the spectrum it's orange. So in my reds, I can make them less red and more orange by dragging it this direction. And I would say this top red slider is the one I change the most because it affects skin the most. So if you want people to look a little less sunburnt and a little more tan, I guess would be like a general way to put it, we could slide this slider up a little bit. And then this is another area where you can really change your greens too. So if there's a lot of like a lime green in this image, like you can see the yellow is here, blue is here, you can make your greens more blue and less yellow using this slider. That's kind of hard to tell since there's not a lot. Yeah. But yeah, you can just kind of play around in there. That's the best way to figure these out, is to like grab the slider and go drastic in one direction so that you can even see what it's changing, and then kind of tone it down and be like, okay, this is kind of more along the lines of what I want. But I would say this is our biggest tool to correct skin tones, just because you can hone in on those reds and those oranges and those yellows, because that's usually the colors affected for that. Yep. Oh, and then we had one more example for you here. So this is the color image. I just wanted to show you that first, because the HSL slider actually applies to black and white images too, even though we're talking about honing in on a color. Mm-hmm. So this is just that image converted to black and white. And you can see, for my liking, the skin tones look a little bit blown out. Like the rest of the image is okay. And if I were to just pull the exposure down over the whole image, I think that the background would get a little dark. So if I want to, again, hone in on those, like the reds and the oranges and the skin tone, you can still use that. It becomes the black and white slider, but it's very similar, where if I pull it down here, you'll see that the skin tones and like the lips are getting dark because that's where the most reds are. So I can just slightly pull down the reds and the oranges to darken just those areas of this black and white photo. So it's just good to keep in mind that it can apply to both.
All right, so the next tool that we're going to talk about is split toning. And the concept of split toning is really just changing the hue of a shadow or a highlight within an image. And so it can be used really creatively. I tend to use it more so for skin tones. So if you do have a day where it's like really warm and outside, you're in a desert and it's really yellow and orange, and you want to bring their skin tones back down a little bit, or if you're in a cool, rainy environment, but you want to make them look healthy again, sometimes just adjusting the highlights or shadows in an image can really, really affect that. So for example, if I adjust a color in the highlights, this is going to hit like her skin, the white in her dress a little bit, his collar. And if I was going to adjust the shadows, it's going to hit her hair, this darker area here. And so my preset has a little bit of split toning in it naturally to just make them look a little bit warmer. And so right now it's turned on. This is about where I would want everything. But if I turn it off, you can see that it's just a little bit cooler. So I just wanted to give her a nice like tanner look without making the whole image warm. And so if you go and want to adjust it here, you would click on the color within highlights or shadows, and you'll adjust the hue and the saturation. So there's two different ways you can do it. If you click on the colors here and you kind of drag it around, you can see like it's adjusting all the highlights to whatever color you have selected. This is kind of a crazy way to look at it, but it kind of shows you just exactly what it's changing. And obviously the more saturated you go up, of course it's going to affect more of the image, versus if you're really low in there, it's just going to be subtle changes, which is typically how it's used.
So it's basically like applying a filter to only the highlights using whatever color you picked out from that dropper.
Yeah. And then the other manual way to do it would just be like through the hue and saturation sliders here. So you can drag this and know what you're changing it to. And I have the saturation so low right now that you can kind of just see subtle changes. So sometimes it's nice to play with this if you want it to be a little bit more golden versus pink. You've got that flexibility. But if I take the saturation way up, it gets kind of crazy. So
yeah, it's a more subtle, like cool and warm slider, because it's not applying it just flat to the whole image. It's more so applying it to the highlights or just the shadows. So you're warming up the image without warming up everything so much.
yeah, it's like my style best case scenario is I would love to have cooler tones, blues and greens with nice, warm, healthy skin. So it kind of gives me the ability to do that a little bit easier without having to manually brush or change everything. So well, that is split toning.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk to you about lens corrections, and you'll see that right over here under this tab. And so the first one is remove chromatic aberration. And that has a lot of fancy words for, we're going to zoom into this image so that you can kind of see what that is. So you can kind of see around his suit jacket, this pink, this odd line, that's called chromatic aberration. It's something that the camera does, and this is, again, where we're not going to get all techie on you. It's just a side effect of using the digital cameras. So luckily, Lightroom has a little bit a tool, a pretty quick and easy tool, and then you can also kind of make it a little more complex. But you can check that on and off. So you can see the very subtle changes that just checking that box did, but we're going to go into the manual because I can still see that pink line there around the edges. And you use the dropper tool to select the color that, and it knows that you're looking for like pink or green, because that's usually what chromatic aberration is. So we select that, and you'll see now that after doing that, it's pretty much gone. So that's one way to do it, just using the dropper tool, similar to the white balance dropper. Or you can manually choose the color here and remove it drastically. Like it's so micro that it's kind of hard to see probably, but you'll see, like, if it's all the way down, you see the pink line. If I bring it up, it starts to bring it down. You do need to pay attention to like skin tones and pinks and in the other parts of the image, maybe like around the flowers, because it can start to affect those if you drag it too drastically. Almost anything in Lightroom you don't want to do too drastically. Like, you got to try to be subtle with most of these sliders. So
yeah, and Lightroom tends to try to automatically adjust like a more of a maroon chromatic aberration or a green chromatic aberration. So this is like kind of an example of one that we would go into manual for. A lot of times just having that button selected as part of your preset will just fix it. But sometimes it takes a little bit more adjusting if the light is hitting the lens extra strange that day.
yeah, I'm honestly, I'm sure there's a mile-long explanation on Wikipedia about why it happens, but we'll save that for another day. So yeah, both of us have import presets that are just the same settings that we apply to every image. And part of those presets is having this box checked so that it's automatically just already done. And then as we go through each image, if we notice, oh, that one has some weird pink or green outlining, we can go into the manual and like further adjust it. The next thing we wanted to show you in this area is the enable profile corrections, because along with the chromatic aberration, we also just go ahead and check this as an import preset. And I'm going to go to this image, zoom back out, and uncheck it. So it's very subtle again. These are micro adjustments, but they're just little changes that can make for a more polished look. So you'll see, because lenses are spherical, they create kind of like a distortion, like a fisheye distortion. And this kind of flattens the image back out and keeps it from looking, and you might not have even noticed it if you didn't see the before and after, but you can kind of see, I'm just gonna turn it on and off for you. So there's, and you see the vignetting on the corners, like the darkened edges, and then you turn it on and it just kind of evens the image back out and gets rid of that distortion.
All right, so we're gonna go into basic brushing a mask over an image. And so this is just taking any of your basic settings that you would normally adjust in an image and applying it to a smaller area, to a brush, or you can do a gradient or radial, and just individually applying it to one area of the photo. So when you go into this tool right here, you'll see kind of the basic menu pop back up. And you can drag these sliders in either direction to adjust it. So for this image, what kind of bothers me is the fact that her hands look kind of strange color, like they're in the shadow, and it almost distracts me from this little baby's face right here. And the dark circles around her eyes, just from it being later in the day. And so I'm just gonna slightly adjust that to overall make the image look better. And you can change your brush size if you see me going up and down with just the, oh, I don't even know what that's called. The brackets, that's what it's called.
Bracket key on your keyboard.
Yep, just like a plus and minus, but it's the brackets right underneath your plus and minus. And so I'm gonna just make it kind of the size I want. Brush over her hands, and if you press O, is a quick tool to show you just exactly where you brushed. And I'm going to do her hands first and then her eyes. And the O is a quick tool for this show selected mask overlay here, and it just shows you exactly where you're at so you can clean it up if you need to.
I remember that O for overlay.
Yep, O for overlay. So I'm bringing the shadows up a little bit, and now our hands kind of look kind of green, so I'm going to make them a little bit pinker, make her skin look a little bit more normal, a little bit warmer.
Your eye naturally goes to the darkest and the brightest spots on an image. So this tool is really helpful for kind of evening that out so that your eye goes where you want it to go rather than going to these like weird shadowy areas.
Yep. So I feel like that looks just a little bit healthier, maybe not quite so much, but looks a little bit healthier. And then to do a second brush in the same image, I'll go to New, and I will adjust the settings I would like again. I'm just going to start with shadows, and then I'll go from there. And I'm just going to brush over her dark circles real quick.
If you didn't pick New, it would apply the same settings, obviously, that were on the hands to the eyes.
Yep.
So normally you want to like fresh start if it's going to be a little bit of a different setting.
Might give her a little bit of exposure there. Yeah, and so you're just not drawn quite as intensely to that.